Well, y'all, welcome. I'm very excited to be here. I get to talk about my favorite thing in life, which are trees, and particularly trees in the context of our planet as a whole. A little bit about me. Well, he gave you sort of a little background about me. I am one of the owners of Leaf and Limb. We care for trees because we love our planet. We do things like pruning and taking care of soil and planting trees. So this is my profession and my passion all at the same time. This would be the part where I would click and then we would begin. So instead, I'm going to tell you some jokes. I'm just kidding. That was the joke, actually.
But do you do it for like commercial or residential or both?
Both. Yeah, if you'd ever like to get some consultations regarding your trees, let us know. All right, so let me make sure I can. It's not a presentation if we don't have a little technical difficulty. So this is the fun part. Oh, there we go. Excellent. No, and if that's the worst of our problems, then we're going to have a great night. Okay, so kind of setting the stage here. There's a lot of things that are changing here on planet Earth, and they're changing fairly quickly. And I want to just run through some high-level things, and this relates particularly to trees. So first of all, trees themselves. And I always like to start with this little illustration. If we just count out 2 seconds together. So let's go. 1,000, 2, 1,000. In those 2 seconds, we just lost a football field worth of trees. And that happens every 2 seconds of every single day. That's the rate of deforestation we're seeing on this planet. It's quite rapid. If you were to look at Earth and just pretend like Earth is 46 years old, we scale it down, then humans have only been here for a handful of minutes. And in the last couple of seconds of that time span of 46 years, we've actually cut down half the world's trees. We can also talk about biodiversity. So this one's near and dear to me. I love animals and birds and bugs. These things are just some of my favorite things. We've lost in the last 40 years the majority of all life on this planet. That's fish, lizards, birds, you name it. And we're not necessarily talking yet about species extinction, but we're talking about whole massive populations of birds that are dying off and mammals that are dying off. And eventually that will become species extinction. But it's approximately 60% of all life has been ended within the last 40 years. Clean air, we talk a lot about clean air. To sort of put that in perspective on what that means, each year about 4.2 million deaths related to unclean air. I don't know that that's necessarily a global catastrophe, but that is a lot of lives being lost. If you put that in the context of recent famines or wars or things like that, that's a big number. Soil, another shocker. In the last 150 years, we've lost half of our world's topsoil. And that's through farming practices, it's through development, through deforestation. Those go hand in hand. And ultimately, erosion, things like this. We need topsoil. There's a difference between dirt and soil. You can't grow food in dirt. And then water, another big one. And we're almost done. We've only got one more after this. But water is something we don't think very much about. We have 37 major aquifers here on the planet. NASA monitors these very closely, and they're finding that of our 37, 21 are being used faster than they can be replenished. And if you put that in the context of, say, oil, I can't even really begin to imagine what might happen if we actually started running low on clean water. And finally, is carbon. There's really only two things that can happen with carbon. You can either oxidize carbon, sequester carbon, meaning you put it in a stable state, in soil, in trees, and water, that kind of thing. Or it oxidizes. It means it goes up into the atmosphere. And typically that happens through burning, deforestation, industrial agricultural practices, cement production. And of course, we have the things we hear about a lot, car emissions, these sorts of things. But in the last 250 years, we've seen a 40% rise in carbon in our atmosphere. That's a lot of extra carbon. It's going to change things. So what to do? I'm going to give you some hope after that depressing scenario. We've absolutely got the tools we need. And I don't want to suggest that this is the only tool we need. There's many, many, many things we should do. But this is one thing we can do. I'm going to talk about how trees can help alleviate some of these issues. And then the fun part of this lecture, I'm going to actually get into the nitty-gritty of things you can do in your yard or in your community. So let's go back to the same list, same issues, and talk about the role that trees can play. One of the things that's amazing about trees is they're home to 80% of all terrestrial life. So when we're thinking about jungles and forests and trees as a whole, 80% of all land-based life live in trees. For those of you who have read Doug Tallamy, he's got some great books. If you haven't read them, I recommend them. But his newest one is called The Nature of Oaks. And he goes through and he actually looks at the level of life that an oak tree provides. And it's just fascinating. He estimates something like 500 different species of caterpillars alone. And then if you add in the leaf hoppers and all the other things that live in these trees, we're talking about 1,000 species of insects that live in a tree. Those insects then feed birds and possums and raccoons. The acorns feed 100 different invertebrates here in North America. The tree itself is a home to all sorts of life. So when you look at a tree, you can think a neighborhood and a grocery store all in one. And now you start expanding that out to whole canopies, whether it's an urban canopy or a forest canopy. We can help restore life for some of these creatures. We talked about clean air. There's a lot of talk about how we might build filters to scrub air of pollutants and CO2. The cool thing is we actually have that technology already. It's called a tree. And trees are really good at sucking down pollutants and carbon dioxide, which we'll get to next or in a few slides. They ran a study, I think it was University of Washington ran a study. They looked at 55 different cities around the US, and they measured how many pollutants trees in those 55 cities were able to bring out of the local atmosphere. And they found that these trees, and I'm going to convert this into blue whales for you, because I don't think any of us really know what a metric ton is. They scrubbed 711,000 metric tons. But in blue whales, that's 4,000 blue whales. That's a lot of pollutants. So that's good news. When we talk about soil, y'all, soil, the backbone of how soil is built is essentially the following. A tree photosynthesizes, and through its root system, it feeds all the creatures that live around its root system. They're called root exudates. Those root exudates are sort of, I'm simplifying this greatly, but they are the backbone for how you build soil. So trees actually go about developing soil. And not only that, when they help build living soil, they also help pull water down. So we start to get at the water issue, which we'll go to next. Soil and trees are yin and yang. We're going to get a lot into this later in this presentation, but trees and all of plant life play an essential fundamental role in building soil. If we were to go all the way back to the beginning of the planet, it was lichen that helped break down rock. And that was the very beginning of what essentially is this recipe of plants pulling energy from the sun, feeding sugars out to the life that lives in the dirt. The life that lives in the dirt processes dirt and eventually turns all of this into living soil with micro aggregates and macro aggregates and all kinds of cool stuff. So enough on that. And we're going to stop for questions after the next two slides. We talked about water a little bit. So in North America, forests are responsible for 60% of all of our drinking water. The trees play a significant role in helping actually bring water down into our aquifers. I'll give you an example. If you were to have an acre of paved surface and it rained 1 inch, you would have about 25,000 gallons of runoff. It's a lot of runoff. If you took that same acre of wooded area, it will release less than 1,000 gallons of water because it's pulling so much water down into the soil. And when you pull water down into the soil, that's the beginning of recharging your aquifers. You've got to have plant life, and you've got to have loamy soils, which means there's plant life, in order to refill your aquifers. Otherwise, it runs off and it goes into, say, Crabtree Creek, and we have flooding on a random Saturday, and then it rushes down to New Bern, and they have flooding on a random Saturday, and then it sweeps out into the oceans 2 days later, and we didn't get any of that water in our aquifers unless maybe it was held in Jordan Lake or Falls Lake. And then finally, we talk about CO2. I mean, arguably one of the most important things happening right now. And trees are, of course, the quintessential. They were built to suck down CO2. Literally, this is what they do. As a matter of fact, a really cool study came out of, this is now sort of old news for those of you who probably already know this, but study done that found we could capture 2/3 of all the CO2 we've emitted over the last 200 years if we've planted and reforested only non-arable land. And this organization actually looked at the planet, identified non-arable land, meaning land that's not being used for farming, for development, ran calculations, and this is what they came up with. There's been a lot of debate about this since, so I don't want to get too caught up on the numbers, but the point is that trees can certainly play a role in helping sequester carbon. And of course, it makes sense. Oceans, soil, trees. These are the original agents for pulling carbon down. So I want to stop there for some questions. Love to hear your questions. And if there's online questions, I'll take those as well. But let's start with the room if you have any questions.
Well, not only just trees and carbon, they also are
kind of pushing that people shouldn't be tilling their soil as much because that
Right.
supposedly
Agreed.
releases carbon too.
It does. So for those maybe online, the question was whether tilling the soil also releases carbon. And it's true, it does. You have within living soil, there are many creatures that live there. One of them are fungi, and they have long hypha threads that run through the soil and hold things together. Fungi are one of the predominant producers of what are called macro aggregates, which just imagine like a clump of popcorn in some sugar. That popcorn holds space, and that's what allows water and air to move down and gas exchange to happen. So you need the macro aggregates, and then many of your bacteria form micro aggregates, and all this life living. And when you run your tillers through the soil, you are cutting up all of that life. When the life dies, it releases carbon. So, and not only that, when the life dies, soil actually becomes compacted because the things that hold the space within the soil are no longer living, and it loses carbon at a faster rate. So yes, absolutely. And we're going to get a little bit into that at some point. But good point. Other questions?
Yes, so I had a question about reforesting non-arable land. Well,
Yeah.
Is it non-arable land because stuff won't grow in it? So how do you get the trees to grow in it?
Non-arable land in this case is not being used for farming or development, but it is capable of growing trees.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about all the trees that are gone in California because of the fires?
Don't know. Plant new ones, I guess.
I mean, is it as simple as just replant trees, or will they automatically regerminate because of seeds that have dropped from before?
Well, there's a point at which no, it doesn't. You do lose your seed bank eventually. But yeah, we can absolutely reforest areas. There's some really great work happening in terms of what's called high density reforestation, also called Miyawaki reforestation. But it's this idea of, like for example, here in North Carolina, we could go out to a oak hickory forest, which is a climax forest ecosystem, and we could take an inventory of the species, which has been done. And based on that, we could then select all of those plants and begin planting seedlings 2 feet apart and refill a whole area. And it would actually grow up together and it would skip all of the 100 years of ecological succession and become a mature oak hickory forest. And you could do that and then allow that to spread out.
Right.
So there are definitely things we can do, but it would take some efforts, of course.
I could just answer a little bit of that. There are some plants, especially out west, that will germinate until there is a fire. So they actually stay dormant until there is a fire, whether the cone was releasing the seed when they burn. But there's actually dormancies out there that you can break by just smoking a seed. Kind of strange, but they actually wait until there's a forest fire when there's more sun to start germinating.
Give them some rain.
Yep.
They'll grow.
Yes. That one's harder to do.
Well, any online questions?
Here's a question from Mary Ann.
Sure.
Should we cut down our shrubs and gardens and grow trees instead?
Hard question to answer. Yep. I would say keep your gardens. I think gardens are great. It's a chance to, I think you can have both. I don't think it has to be an either or. That's just my opinion because I love my garden.
Yep.
Well, and it's diversity too.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah, you
for
can-
insects, birds, animals.
Yeah. You can have different ecosystems within your yard. 100%. Yeah. Different ecosystems will support different things. Now, I would say if that garden was filled with species from other continents, maybe think about replacing them with native species, but we'll get to that.
Well, we need, if we just had just trees, we would lose all our sunlight to our soil and stuff, all the undergrowth as well, correct? I mean, we need both. We need a balance.
Yeah, we need all the ecosystems. Absolutely. I'm for all the ecosystems.
That's it for the online questions.
Okay, cool.
Basil.
Keep the questions coming if you're online, if you're in person. I think questions are probably the most fun part about this. But let's keep going. So now we're going to get into this segment of things you can actually do or convince your neighbors to do or get your HOA board to do, these sorts of things. Because I have found that when I'm given bad news, I like to have something I can do about said bad news. So these are 12 things we're going to go through. And it's actually based on the book that some of you are holding here today. I don't know if you got a copy, but we're going to go into more detail today. So, we need more trees. We've got to plant more trees, but it's very important. There's not a lot of conversation happening around what we should be planting, where we should be planting it. So we've got to be mindful about these things. Is this a species that's adapted to grow here? Will it support? Will it be able to live in its space? I want to show you a photo from downtown Raleigh. This is a willow oak. Planted in a very small spot. I'm happy to see the tree doing that well, but ultimately that's just a little bit too small. We needed to have either made a bigger planting bed or maybe chose a different species here. And also you'll notice they're probably, well, not probably, you can't see from this angle, but there's branches growing into the building and stuff. So maybe not the right species for that given location. Number 2, and this is one you might see a lot. It's called a mulch volcano. I'm sure you've seen these around town. I don't know how this became the standard for good-looking yards, but it has become the standard for good-looking yards. And I'm here to tell you, it will definitely kill your trees. Mulching is a really wonderful thing, just not on the trunk of the tree. I'm going to show you a little video here about mulch volcanoes. And by the way, we're going to do a couple of videos today. These are videos that we have on our YouTube channel, and I think they just do a better job talking than I do here. You've probably seen this in the suburban landscape. This is what we call a mulch volcano. It looks great, but it's actually very harmful to the tree. Different parts of the tree are designed to perform different functions. The roots, for example, they are underground, they stay moist, they absorb water. The trunk is designed to grow above ground where it's supposed to stay dry. But having this mulch piled around the base of the tree constantly means that the cells of the trunk stay oversaturated. This causes damage to the cells, which means they're not able to perform their duties, which means the overall health of the tree begins to decline. In addition, the mulch volcano provides an excellent place for new roots to grow. And they begin growing round and round the trunk of the tree. Over time, this leads to girdling. Girdling roots will quite literally strangle a tree. I'm going to cut it off there. Just wanted you to see this concept of girdling root is a technical word that's used, but I like to call them strangling roots. They just strangle the trunk of the tree. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but hopefully somebody today will see that and say, oh, I'm going to go move my mulch volcano. It's important.
People do it. I mean, who taught them to do that?
It is, the question is who taught landscapers to do this? I don't know. Who's to say?
Okay.
Also in this vein of planting, and then we'll get to some questions regarding planting. We've got 3 different slides about planting. When you're thinking about what to plant, also consider this aspect. We hear a lot about natives and near natives. If that's a new concept to you, which is probably not if you're here, but if it is a new concept to you, it's this idea that certain plants here in North America have co-evolved with our insects here in North America. So therefore, they can feed insects here. But when you bring, say, a Japanese maple into North America, where it just hasn't been here, it feeds less than 10 insects. And those insects are generalists that can eat just about anything. But most insects are specialists, and they've spent a very, very long time evolving and adapting to be able to overcome the plant's defense system. So, I mentioned earlier that oak tree that supports 1,000 species compared to, say, a Japanese maple, which supports 10. There's a very big difference in terms of local ecology. Not to say you can't have your Japanese maples too, but, and particularly because they like shade, maybe it rests in the shade of an oak tree. The third thing to consider, and by the way, that was the third thing to consider, sorry. I want to show you 2 resources that I really like. The one on the top is an article we've written at our website. We've got several different articles on these topics of how to pick good species. And then the other one I really love is this one. This is the Native Plant Finder. It was a collaboration between Doug Tallamy and National Wildlife Federation. And you can essentially just punch in your zip code and it'll give you a whole litany of amazing native trees and shrubs. Also, I couldn't fit any more on here, but we need to mention NC State has an amazing plant finder as well. And they've gotten really good about updating that. The database has now got a rich diversity of information regarding natives. If you haven't used NC State's plant finder, it is good. I highly recommend it. So the big picture, we know we need lots and lots of trees, billions by some estimates, but we've got to be mindful about what we're planting, where we're planting, and how we're planting. If we do those things, these trees will grow up to be healthy trees. If we skip these things, we're just creating future problems. So that segment was all about planting. What are your questions in terms of planting?
So what about Bradford pears, right?
Yeah.
The terrible Bradford pears and, you know, some of the weak trees that everyone, all the, you know.
Yes, the question is, if you didn't hear that, what about Bradford pears? You know, they're again, non-native species. They don't support anything here. Not only that, but particularly the Bradford pear is now gone wild. The idea was, oh, Bradford pear is sterile. Well, they didn't realize, yeah, it might be sterile, but once it intermingles with the Bartlett pear and some of the other pears, all of a sudden, now we're getting some of the original calories back and they're going crazy. Certain parts of the country are literally overrun with these Bradford pears. Anecdotal story here, we do tree surveys as part of what we offer. And we were in a tree forest down near like Garner area, and there was a area of Bradford pears gone wild. And when Bradford pears go wild, they get the giant thorns. We literally could not get through this thing. It was truly like an acre of impenetrable Bradford pears. And that was small. You know, there's cases across the country where it spans miles. So really good example of where a non-native tree has not only been introduced, but it was actually highly invasive and aggressive and it's taken over the landscape. And if you get into this whole category of invasive plants, by the way, it's just shocking. I mean, the ecological damage happening from invasive plants is crazy. And unfortunately, every continent, because of global trade and the lack of care being given to what bugs and seeds are being transported, we're just swapping invasive pests for invasive trees, for invasive mussels, you know, you name it. It's just not good. Unfortunately,
Recommend replacing.
I would. Absolutely. Like invasive plants, you should absolutely get rid of them because the birds are eating the seeds and they're spreading the seeds. So North Carolina Invasive Plant Council has a really good set of recommendations for what not to plant and what to get rid of, as does the Native Plant Society, a really great chapter here locally. They've got a great list of stuff. But a lot of stuff needs to go, you know, even like Nandina, which people love, and it looks like it's playing nice. Nandina means bamboo of heaven. It looks like it might be playing nice, but it's being spread everywhere. It's why you walk out in the woods in the middle of, say, an oak hickory forest, and then you see like these random Nandina patches or Iliagnus or ligustrum. So I'm absolutely for removal and replacements. And I would say replacement's important because they do still sequester carbon as much as we don't like these invasive plants. So I don't want to lose that sequestration. I don't want to lose the building of the healthy soil. I just want to do it with a plant that's not going to take over the landscape. And it's going to feed other animals. It's a great question. Other questions related to planting?
Well, we have a question online that wasn't quite related to planting, but maybe it'll make them want to plant one or keep something in their landscape. Elizabeth was wondering what your thoughts are in putting hammocks, swings, etc., on trees. Do they girdle the trees?
There are now these wide straps you can buy, made just for this by people who've thought of this. They're just wide straps, and the tree's not going to grow over that. And I'm all for swings on trees because the more people can interact and enjoy their tree, the more likely they are to want more of them.
Okay, great. And here is a good planting one. In fact, it's pre-planting, but you have to have that too. Sally, who by the way comes all the way from Oregon, has asked, how do we get nurseries to provide more pollinator-friendly species instead of almost the newest and greatest? And Sally, definitely something that I always recommend, ask them. A lot of the nurseries can get all kinds of plants. They only can stock a certain number of them, but they have oodles and oodles of things that are accessible to them.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what's in demand because that's what they're going to get, but you can get quite a few things from them. Any experience with that yourself, Basil?
Yeah. I don't know what part of Oregon you're in, and thanks for tuning in, by the way. That's awesome. But if you're in one of the major metro areas or even somewhere, there's surely going to be a native plant provider, but I'm assuming you've looked for that. So let's just assume you've reached the end of the rope and there's nobody providing native plants. My recommendation, this might be a little crazy, but you can actually go out and harvest your own native plant seeds, whether those are flowers or they're trees, and begin growing things yourself. And you might even find there's other people in the area who would love to do the same thing. Here in Raleigh, we've got some really cool groups, some meetup groups that I'm a part of, some Facebook groups. We actually at Leaf and Limb do this thing called Project Pando, where we go out and we actually collect wild tree seeds from our local native species, and we grow those trees to give away for free. It's quite the thing here. So you might have a similar group in your area. And just by doing that, I think you'll probably see a rise in native available from your nurseries, because if there's local interest, like Chris said, there's going to be supply.
So what do you do? This is just me asking. What do you do for permissions? Because you can't go willy-nilly anywhere you feel like. And federal lands are sometimes off limits, national parks.
For sure. I mean, you should
things like that.
Be mindful of local laws, looking for signs, no trespassing. Definitely don't trespass in people's yards and things like that. But in publicly available areas, there's seeds to be collected everywhere. Or get permission. It's another good thing. Sure.
Thinking about along my lane that leads to my home, I have lots of pines. I'm thinking about taking out the pines and replanting it to create different diversity. Is that a wise thing to do or a stupid thing to do?
I wouldn't recommend taking out the pines in favor of other trees. Pines are really good. They're native also. They're powerhouses. They're some of the strongest trees out there. They get a bad rap, but they're actually the ones that survive the storms typically, which is the folks fear often. I would say their ecological value is sky high. Don't replace the pines. And
so keep them.
Keep them. Yeah. And not to mention also, like, local ecology will, given enough time, will adapt. As your soils, trying to make this simple, the soils will evolve. Depending on where you are exactly, if you were to wait 100 years, it would probably end in an oak hickory climax forest ecosystem. Pines are often a succession species, as are sweet gums, and they pave the way for the mid-level forest species like maple, beech, these things which eventually give way to oak and hickory and sometimes beech. So I would say leave them. It's just an early succession tree.
Okay.
And I did see one more question over here in the chat. I'm not too sure if it's about planting, but Gwen was wondering, and what is considered NC native plants changing with the change in our weather? It can be plants shifting from the south, moving up north.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot about this. There's some interesting things. Like, I'm reading now that southern magnolias grow in Ithaca, New York for the first time ever, which is pretty interesting. I just finished reading a really great peer-reviewed study looking at the changing forest ecosystem in Ithaca, New York across the last 100 years. So I think things are changing in terms of what will grow where. Depends on how far you want to go down the rabbit hole. I don't worry too much about that when I'm planting trees. Meaning, if it's growing here now, I'll plant it like white oaks and hickories and pines and things like that. But absolutely, it's a valid point. It is something to be considered for sure. I'd say if you have the time to consider the geographic variety of a species and can predict where you think things might go, then by all means plant for those changing zones.
One of the problems, at least for me, for nativity, is we always use geopolitical borders.
Right.
Whether it's in my city or in my county or in my state or in the Southeast.
Yeah.
Plants don't recognize that. They don't look at the map. So
agreed. Yes, and that's a really good point. when we're talking about natives, I don't want to exclude what are called near natives. So for example, like the Kentucky coffee tree, I use this example a lot. I mean, it grows a state away. Again, trees don't really recognize these lines. Maybe the coffee tree doesn't readily grow here in the Piedmont, but it will grow and it will support a lot of diversity. I think these are still, we don't have to get black and white or either or. I think there's a lot of shades of gray where it comes to native. I think generally trying to even just keep it to the North American continent is at least a good start.
A lot of the trees are really, really old. And they've been through like numerous climate changes and differences. So they sort of adapt when you're talking about 1,000-year-old trees.
They will, but there's a problem. You're right, about 200 years ago, they would have adapted, but there's a change now that's prohibiting a lot of trees from adapting. And that is trees migrate. Imagine like a very, very slow buffalo herd. Trees do move, but forests will only move about 20 to 50 feet a year because the seeds have to be distributed out by squirrels and blue jays. When we have development and these huge farms and these other geographic boundaries, many trees get stuck and they cannot isolate beyond it. They cannot travel and migrate beyond a certain point. And you got to also factor the going up. A lot of species get stuck in the tops of mountains. There's some really interesting studies that have been done looking at mountaintops across different continents and seeing what's been stuck up there. So you do have a point about adaptation, but the problem is human development and farming have changed the tree's ability to adapt. So don't be so sure that we'll see these trees adapt. Some will, surely, hopefully, but then we're looking at maybe a different scenario, which is decreasing genetic diversity. And anytime we're decreasing genetic diversity, it makes life as a whole more vulnerable because there's more ways for life just to go extinct.
It's been a while since I've read on the topic, but I did read quite a while ago that generally plants can move south further than they can north.
Interesting.
You have the prevailing winds in the fall going from the north to the south, and you also have the migratory birds heading down south that might eat a seed and drop it off somewhere. Right. So a lot of our plants that might have been native to this area during the glaciers wound up in Florida, but they were never able to come back up. So yeah, that's where they could lose a little bit of help. But we do have a couple more questions about planting in the chat.
Sure, let's keep going.
I actually just lost one of them, so I need to touch the screen. Let me see if I can get it on the chat. So I'll ask one out of order. Michael has asked, if you only plant one single kind of tree in Durham, which would you choose?
White oak.
You knew that one.
It's a powerhouse.
Oh, white oak.
White oak, yeah.
I happen to like white oak too. There's some beautiful ones.
And just incredibly, they're awesome trees. All the diversity we talked about earlier, these trees can often live for 900 years in a forest ecosystem or more. In the UK, they have 1700-year-old oak trees. So they're really amazing species. They're just, oaks are a critical part of North American diversity.
I don't know if anyone paid attention to the oak that I included in the announcement. That was a live oak down in the Orlando area, which is also one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I'd rank them
and
quite high.
I got to put a plug in for Project Pando. We are giving away white oaks as we speak. So if you're interested, shoot me an email, basil.camu@leafbloom.com, and come get some free white oaks next week.
So here's the question that disappeared off my chat. Susan said she would like to have a sourwood, but she's been told they are hard to transplant or even just to get them. Any suggestions?
I think Mellow Marsh in Siler City sells sourwood saplings. I'm pretty sure they do. And they're awesome species. Highly recommend them. Otherwise, wait a year and we'll be giving away for Project Pando. But I'm pretty sure Mellow Marsh is selling them as we speak. And I think they're like $2 a plug.
And I've heard they're difficult too, even from a container, establishing them in a home landscape. And I did it several years ago, just planted it, didn't know better, and it grew perfectly fine, but kept on getting bagworms. So I got rid of it. So now I feel bad because it was growing quite nicely. Oh, well. And here's a question from Sherry. How close can you plant oak trees together?
Very close. Kind of diving into another topic we're going to get into later, which is structure. But this high density planting, I strongly recommend it. We're talking about planting trees 2x2 grid. It doesn't have to be perfect squares, but you can literally, I'm actually doing one of these right now as we speak. We've got 2 plots we're doing at Leaf and Limb, and we've taken a full inventory of an oak hickory forest. We've obtained 95 different species from that ecosystem, overstory, understory, shrub layer, and we're planting at a 2x2 grid. And this is being done around the world. It's called high density planting or Miyawaki planting, and your whole ecosystem grows up. And what will happen is the strong trees will, the overstory, they'll gather their space, understory will gather its space, shrubs will gather its space, and whatever wasn't able to compete will die out. And what they're finding through these high density plantings is that, let's say we have 100 trees. By putting these 100 trees together in a close-knit community, the rising tide lifts all boats. They grow faster, they're more resilient, they're more healthy, they're able to offer oversized ecological services like building healthy soil and pulling water down, as compared to those same 100 trees planted separately. So there's these exponential benefits we get from these high density plantings. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like, in one of these experiments, we're putting 350 trees in an 800 square foot area. So it's pretty remarkable I would encourage you to get online and Google Miyawaki method or Miyawaki planting. That's like the cool name for it, but it's high density tree planting. It's pretty awesome stuff. So to answer the question, you can get a lot of trees near each other.
Someone's asking, how do you spell Miyawaki?
Miyawiki.
So that was a tough one right there. So that takes care of all the questions in the chat, man.
Cool. Well, let's keep going. These are great questions, y'all. These are my favorite part, is just answering. I love the questions. So this next litany of slides, litanies is the wrong word, 4 slides, will be all about soil. And first up, I've got this idea of arborist wood chips. So I am a big fan of arborist wood chips. You can get them for free from any local tree service or tree care company. We give them away for free. And the idea is it's just branches chipped up. They're going to provide so many more benefits for your trees than the processed mulches will, the triple shreds, the dyed mulches. I can really go into the weeds if anybody wants to hear all the details, but the short version is these arborist wood chips are better for your tree and they're free. This is what they look like. People always want to know what they look like, so I've included this. It's just unprocessed chipped tree material.
Where can you get a small amount, not a huge?
If you want a small amount, come by Leaf and Limb and load a pickup truck, or split a load with your neighbors. But we maintain a massive pile. We're happy to give some away for free if you just want to come by. But but for those tuning in from wherever you are, the best thing is just to go in with your neighbors, or just keep a pile on your property that you use year after year. The more it sits, the more it breaks down and becomes something incredible. And this is the slow but cheap or free way to build soil. Just layers of wood chips across your beds.
I had to have a couple of trees cut down last year, and I had them leave the wood chips, and it took me forever to get the pile distributed. I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? But I was so glad I did. And it really helped my soil.
Nice. Glad to hear it. And the question is, should you put wood chips in the soil versus on the soil?
Right.
And the answer is on is better, because in will pull some nitrogen out. Now, it'll then re-release it after the rotting is done. So it's, in the end, it's fine. But if you have new plants around, that could be a problem.
Okay.
Okay, this is a bed of wood chips here. All right, leave the leaves. So important. If you walk through the forest, and you'll notice when you're walking around, that soil is nice and loamy. It feels kind of even like a marshmallow. It's just amazing. That's because of all that rotting leaves. It's building soil. Trees feed the soil every year with their leaves, and then that soil in turn feeds and cares for the tree for the rest of the year. So it's this yin-yang rotational relationship. It's pretty incredible stuff. There's nobody out in the woods doing fertilization, and that's because the trees are doing it themselves. Little technical information, about 50% of the nutrients from the tree are pulled down into the roots during the fall when it goes into dormancy, and the other 50% are left in the leaves. So this is really good fertilizer. for the trees. And not only that, but many of those insects we were chatting about earlier, those moths and butterflies and all this life live in the leaf duct. It's so crucial. And I know somebody out there is going to ask about the snakes. So let me give you this information about snakes. There's only been one recorded death ever in the history of the United States from a copperhead. Fun fact number one. Fun fact number two, you're far more likely to get hit by lightning than get bit by a snake. And fun fact number three about snakes. Every year, CDC reports there are 800,000 vicious dog attacks that require medical attention. In comparison, there are only 7,000 snake bites that require medical attention. So you're far more likely to be attacked by a dog viciously than be bit by a snake. So fears around snakes, you can put those at ease.
How do you encourage people with turf grass to leave the leaves?
Well, my first answer would be get rid of the turf grass, but assuming that's not a possibility, which is not realistic, that's just me being facetious, sorry. I would say you've got a couple of options. So number one, you can rake your leaves into your beds and your grass is exposed. So that's an easy one. But let's say even that's a problem, at least keep your leaves and make a pile somewhere in the corner of your yard where they just rot. And as those leaves rot every year, you can actually take that rotting leaf matter, spread it out over your grass, rake it into your grass, and you're fertilizing your grass. So, not my favorite thing in the world, but at least you're keeping your carbon. We're not paying the city our money to drive their trucks to suck up their leaves. Yeah. So at a minimum, just a pile on your property somewhere where they can rot. And then you can use that rotting material for other things. Okay. Number 6, and this stuff about soil, thinking twice about using chemical fertilizers. The short version of chemical fertilizers is short-term gain for long-term pain. They're not going to help your plant. If you want to, every nutrient that your plant needs is within the sand, silt, or clay that forms soil. So as our rocks have weathered over the many years, they break down into sand, silt, and clay. They contain a litany of minerals, pretty much everything you need for most any plant. The reason many plants are malnourished is because there's no biological activity in the soil with which to unlock those nutrients. So earlier we were talking about how the tree puts sugar out and it feeds the fungi and the bacteria and all the things that live there. Well, those creatures also break down sand, silt, and clay. For example, fungi actually secrete an acid outside of their body that breaks these things down and it becomes plant-soluble nutrients. So the biggest issue we have is not enough life in soil because we're spraying chemicals, we're using fertilizers, which kills the life. We're not leaving our carbon. But if you really want to fertilize your tree, the best that you can do is feed the biological life within the soil. You're leaving your leaves, leaving your wood chips. Maybe you do want a fertilizer. Well, then do what we do at Leaf and Limb. We make composts, and then we soak those composts in water to become something called a compost tea. And when we go do fertilization for clients, we're not actually really fertilizing according to the traditional term. We're injecting biological life and biological food within the soil because we just want to stimulate biology. Now, if you imagine Maslow's need of hierarchies, like most of us are stuck sort of at the bottom, like need biological life in the soil because urban soils have been developed and they've been clear cut. There's a lot of missing life. If you were to overcome that lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we start getting up the ladder a little bit, and you're, say, a professional farmer doing regenerative farming practices, it does get more complicated. You might need to add like potash and things like that. But first, we have to get past this basic building block of living soil. And that's, for most of us in the urban setting, all we really need to worry about. So this stuff is just not going to help. I'm going to do a quick little video segment on this.
Traditional fertilizers generate all sorts of problems. They can undermine the stability of your tree. They destroy the relationship between a tree and its beneficial mycorrhizal fungi. They pollute our streams, killing fish and other wildlife. There are some good fertilizer products available, but they are the ones that are focusing on enhancing biology, not on chemical inputs. So you want to look for products that have little to no nitrogen, no phosphorus, beneficial microbes.
I really just wanted to get to that one point, which is this idea of the harmful impacts actually within the soil. And then if we start evaluating manufacturing, transportation, downstream pollution, there's just all the reasons not to use chemical fertilizers. And by the way, y'all, if you're wondering why I randomly have videos of myself that I'm showing you, it's because we do a newsletter series, and every month we send out an educational video and some educational articles about trees. If you would like to get that newsletter, and we don't sell, we just teach, just go to our website, leaflim.com, and you can sign up there. We do this every month. Finally is this piece. We've really kind of, I think, emphasized this pretty well. So I'm going to show a video on this topic.
Here in the forest, the soil has everything it needs. And because of that, it can take care of the trees. It feeds this oak here, and this thing is super happy. Here's the kicker. Each year, this oak drops these leaves. This rotting stuff, this is soil food. And if we have this, we also have air and we have water. This is what keeps soil alive. I'm Basil, and today I'm here to talk about soil. It is alive, and I mean it's like really alive. It's like you and me. It needs oxygen, it needs water, it needs food. If it has these things, it's going to feed your trees, it's going to take care of your trees, they're going to be healthy, they're going to be happy. If it doesn't have these things, then you get this. This is what used to be a really beautiful old oak tree, and it is suffering right now. It's a sick tree, and let me show you why. Check this out. So I'm going to use this screwdriver, and I'm going to try to push it into the ground. I want you to see how much I struggled to get this thing in. We're talking, oh my goodness, maybe 2 inches. I'm lucky. That's definitely not full of air. You can just see this stuff. There's no water. Let me see if there's anything in here that looks like rotting food. First, soil. Now, it's just more of the same. It's dry. It's super hard. There's no rotting stuff in here. This is sick dirt, which means we have a sick tree. Here's the exciting news. We can resurrect this dead dirt and turn it back into healthy soil by replicating what we see in the forest every day. So here I recommend that we put down lots and lots of wood chips, and then we let the leaves fall and rot every single year. That's going to create this amazingness that's full of air and water and giving the soil that rotting stuff it needs to eat. That means we've got healthy, happy soil that can then feed the trees. Now we have healthy, happy trees. It's a win-win. And the best part is this. If we do this on a large scale, then we can restore the health of this planet that we call home.
So, I think we've kind of emphasized this pretty well. This is a really important role. If I was to say take away 2 critical topics, it's this one and one that we're about to get to. All those issues we talked about earlier: water, topsoil, CO2, deforestation. By planting trees, we hit 4 of those things at once, and the biodiversity piece. All right, I'm going to stop here. We've covered, I believe, 8 of our 12 slides. And that was the soil segment. Love to hear your questions. We'll, of course, start with y'all here, because you're here. Thanks for being here. And then we'll go online. Questions about soil?
Doesn't look like we have one here in the audience, but I know we have them online. So the first question is on a smaller scale, are coffee grounds, and I think it could be any organic for that matter, helpful?
Sure. Yeah. Any organic matter. Absolutely.
And Elizabeth just asked, should we aerate underneath our trees?
It can definitely help. It's called soil decompaction. And if you have an air tool or a company, this is something we do a lot of. You essentially go in with an air tool and you're tilling the soil, but we're doing it with air so that we're not actually severing roots. And as you till the soil, it's got to be worthy of doing this too, because otherwise we're killing fungal hyphae like we talked about earlier. But if it's compacted soil, presumably not a whole lot of life, then this can be a big boost. We turn it with the air tools, and we also put rotting leaves in there, compost, biochar. You can make your own biochar. It's another very cool thing. Compost teas. And by doing all that, you can do in one day what might take nature 20 years to do. So the cheap way is just lay down a bunch of wood chips every year and wait 20 years. But if you wanted to speed that up, then yeah, air tools are a great way to do that. And that might take some professional help, or you might have access to those tools.
And that takes care of the online questions. Any questions here in the audience? Doesn't look like it.
I've got a question.
Sure.
When you talk about the tools coming in and aerating the tree, if the tree has a fungus, will that take care of the fungus?
I'm going to move. No, it won't. There's no reversing fungal decay, but hopefully we can make the tree healthy enough that it can at least stop it and potentially seal it over. If we can do that, it's not going to spread. But you're not going to ever reverse fungal decay. That is sort of one of those. If we figure that out, we actually might figure out how to live forever. I'm not sure about that, but it's something in there that's pretty fundamental. And one thing that I would recommend though with an air tool, and if you see fungi, there are certain kinds of wood decay fungi that are quite harmful to a tree. So sometimes what we'll recommend is, let's say we see a situation where you've got an old oak tree and a really serious fungal infection, and we want to see more about what's happening under the soil. We might actually recommend that you do use that air tool to peel away the root system so you can see how bad it is. Do we have really extensive decay to where the tree might actually fall over? There's an example of where it's not going to heal the fungi, but at least gives you a better look at what's actually happening. It's a great question.
Trees come down on my woods,
like
in storms, and the interior part of the tree has decayed out where the exterior part looked fine.
Yeah.
What causes that?
It's pretty normal. As trees age, really the only live wood are the outer layers for many tree species. Essentially, as a tree grows, and this is not true for all trees, but most trees, as they grow, that interior wood turns from living tissue into just simply strength. But over time, you're going to actually see that decaying out. As a matter of fact, pre-colonial era in the US, many, if not most bears hibernated inside of trees. It really was a thing, especially maples, because these old trees typically grow really large, and over time, the interior is going to hollow out. If you go to the really old trees of the world, it's pretty standard. And if you really get into the rabbit hole of analyzing tree health and stability, then you can actually take measurements on the live wood and perform calculations about whether it has the strength necessary to support that tree. So don't be scared by a hollow. It's pretty normal. But sometimes they can be dangerous. It just depends. Yeah.
Maggie online has asked, does mowing and mulching leaves add organic matter? I'm assuming to the soil.
Mowing the leaves to break them down a little bit.
Mulch.
Yeah. At least you're leaving your carbon, which is great. But the only thing I'd be concerned about there is just you're killing a lot of the moths and butterflies that are overwintering on those leaves. But better that than raking the leaves to the curb for sure.
Yeah, but mulching with leaves does add organic matter to the soil. We've been using it Arboretum extensively. I've been doing it at home, and I've had a huge difference since I've been doing that just for the last less than 10 years.
I think I misunderstood the question. If you're asking whether it's, yes, leaf compost and leaves in general, just amazing.
Yeah.
My favorite trick is to blend my leaf compost with my wood chips 50-50. Not only does it give it a nice dark color, but then I get different things. The more diversity of rotting material in your wood chips and in your leaf compost, the more different strains of fungal and bacterial life you're feeding. So it's sort of like building diversity in the soil.
Yep. So this one's from Sally from Oregon once again. So maybe we won't be able to help her because it does involve a tree out there that does not grow over here at all. So Sally has a historical tree just south of them that is the grandfather Sitka spruce. It has grown some shelf bracts in a groove in the tree. Is that normal aging or question mark?
I have to say, consult with the ISA arborist in your area on this one. an ISA certified arborist, and make sure they're the kind of company that actually care about trees. Otherwise, they're going to tell you they want to cut the tree down, or no, they're going to tell you should cut the tree down because they want to cut it down. I will just say this though, I am not quick to doom a tree because of fungi. I think it's a very normal tree, especially for older trees. So I can't say for sure without seeing it, but I can say don't let the presence of fungi cause you to cut it down. It warrants further investigation for sure. Other questions? Cool. And I'll also mention, Sally, look for an ISA certified arborist that has what's called TRAQ, T-R-A-Q, a tree risk assessment qualification. And that's somebody who's actually learned a little bit more about these sorts of things. I would recommend those 2 credentials. All right, so we're going to do 2 slides on pruning. The first one's this probably very basic idea that when you're pruning, this is the how. The next one's going to be the why. But a how on tree pruning, this has a laser pointer, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, perfect. So this right here on the slide is the branch collar. And simple biology, there's the branch collar, this little, I'm going to show you a diagram in just a second. This is the only place on a tree that can actually heal. And I do use the term heal loosely. It's technically compartmentalization. It's a more complicated process, but healing is the right way to think about it. So if you hire somebody or you do it yourself, it's very important to identify the branch collar. And that branch collar is essentially where there's this transition zone that then becomes the branch. This one's a little more clear, but the cut's always made just outside the branch collar, and then the tree can heal properly. It's so much more complicated than that. We at Leaf and Limb, our climbers and pruners spend literally years learning how to master this sort of stuff, but that at least gets you on the right track. The how is interesting to me, but the why is always more interesting to me. When pruning, you got to have a goal. And this is getting a little bit to your forest question earlier. Structure is definitely the most important goal. I'm going to start this one off with a video, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Here in the forest, trees compete for sunlight. And this means they grow tall, strong, and straight. But if left on their own, like this elm tree here, they often overgrow and end up hurting themselves in the long run. The answer is structural pruning. Hi, I'm Basil, and today we're talking about why we prune. It's the competition here in this forest that forces these trees to grow straight and tall. You'll notice they all have this general structure. They have a central straight trunk and well-balanced branches. This is really important for a tree. It's this ideal structure that helps keep them healthy and prevent breaking. Structure is strength. If we take away the forest, then all of a sudden this lone tree has all of the sunlight it could possibly want. And that means it's going to grow every which way, and it loses that really important structure that we saw in the forest. So I'll show you a couple of examples here on this elm tree. First of all, you'll notice that it has 2 trunks. And between these 2 trunks, it has this seam. This is something that could very easily separate in a windstorm, especially as the tree gets older. Then if we look up in the canopy, we see all these large, overextended branches. It lacks the structure that we saw in the forest. And unfortunately for this tree, that means that it could split. That happens, it could cause damage to property, it could hurt somebody. It would almost certainly be the end of this tree's life. The solution is structural pruning. And ideally that begins with a young tree like this oak. But it's important for older trees as well. The idea is that we remove branches to create the structure we're looking for. The process takes many, many years because we can only remove so many branches at any given time. But when it's done, hopefully we've created a tree that looks much like the ones we saw in the forests. That means a straight central trunk and well-spaced branches. For us to live side by side with trees in our neighborhoods means that structural pruning is really important. It helps keep trees healthy, prevents them from breaking, and it keeps us safe. And with all the serious issues that are facing our planet today, we need as many healthy trees as we can get.
I was doing a walk through a client's property recently. We were out in the woods of Umstead. It was pretty wild. I came across this maple tree and I look up this trunk, and I'm going to add this picture to my deck later. But the maple tree had a trunk 60 feet tall before the first branch. And the first branch was only about this big, which is great. You don't want, that's exactly how it should be. So different than you see on the neighborhoods. You drive through any neighborhood in Raleigh and the maples, it just, 10 trunks. It's just crazy. And this is, I think, a really good point to drive home. When we find these species growing in their natural ecosystems, they grow differently. And when you get that one strong central trunk, it is so much less likely to split. So if you take away two things, it was the soil, and this is the second thing, is this idea of structure is so critical, especially for these reasons.
If you have a tree that is healthy in all regards, except it seems like all the branches tend to be on one side.
Yep.
What do you do?
Well, I'd have to see the tree. And the question, if you couldn't hear it, was a lopsided tree. All the branches are on one side. One of the things we do is we send climbers up into the tree, and we actually do make reduction cuts to try and encourage the tree to grow either at the top or on the other side, try to shift that structure back the way it should be. If the tree's young, you can steer it a lot. If the tree's old, you might not be able to steer it so much. That's something you can do. And one of the reasons it grows like that is it's just looking for sunlight. We see quite often around houses, trees are growing over the house, long overextended branches. And that's because there's a pocket of sunlight right there. And what we do at Leaf and Limb, and I'm sure there's others do this as well, but you just simply go in and you make very careful, selective reduction cuts on these branches. And you essentially tell the tree, hey, stop putting out growth here, send it to the top of your trunk. It's like squeezing a water balloon. That's what we're trying to do essentially. Unfortunately, that's probably not a do-it-yourself kind of thing. Not unless you're able to, climb a tree and, get out with saws and stuff, but it's something that can be done. It's a great question. Other questions? Any online questions about pruning? And then we are off to the final stretch. None? Okay, cool. All right. Last couple of slides about bugs. When we talk about insects, they're so important. I read this study recently where they estimated the economic value of insects in the US at $57 billion per year. It's a pretty big number. And I don't even know if that included pollination, but they play a huge role. If you think about it, they are pollinating our plants. They're eating green leafy matter, and then birds and animals are eating them. So they're essentially converting sunlight into protein. It's very important for the food chain. So there's a lot of cool things they do. But if we're using broad spectrum fertilizers, I want to show you what ends up happening. So this is actually a pretty normal proposal here in Raleigh. I see this one quite a bit. You'll get these companies, landscapers, tree services, and they'll say this treatment is a mixture of an insecticide, miticide, and fungicide. Throw all the sides in there. But it doesn't work like that. You cannot do a shotgun blast approach on your trees and shrubs and expect to control the problematic pest. Because what ends up happening is when you do these shotgun blasts, and this is true of mosquito sprays also, y'all, if you're getting mosquito sprays in your yard, it's nuking the property. And if you're seeing outbreaks of pests, let me explain why. When you do these broad spectrum sprays, the predators all die along with the prey. So like the ladybugs die along with the mites. So putting that in Serengeti perspective, like the lions and the zebras all go at the same time. Problem is the zebras come back faster. They're more prolific. So in this case, the mites are coming back faster. The aphids, the white flies, these very common landscape pests. And now there's no predators to keep them in check. So by doing these broad spectrum, non-targeted sprays, all we're actually doing is making the issues worse. So if you're going to deal with a pest, You have to very specifically, you got to understand the pest you're after, and you got to understand where in their life cycle they're the most vulnerable. And then you attack them right there with whatever product is going to cause the least amount of collateral damage to the ecosystem. I've got a short little video clip on this.
When treating for pests, you've got to be very specific in how you do so. The goal is to disrupt.
So are you still planning on her going back to living by herself?
Causing any unintended harm to other members of the ecosystem. Otherwise, you might end with a problem much bigger than the one you started with. Another very effective way to treat pests is to identify the underlying health issue and fix that. Because if you can do that, you'll create a healthy tree that's able to naturally defend itself from these pests by keeping a balanced ecosystem. At the end of the day, the goal is not to eradicate the pest, but rather is to restore balance to an ecosystem. And we do that by creating a healthy tree.
So we kind of come full circle there. The number one issue with most trees and shrubs in the urban landscape is
Sitting in the living
soil.
room?
And that's where the leaves and the wood chips come back into play.
Think I was somewhere?
All the dirty little secret to everything in your landscape is just keep that soil alive and healthy. Feed it leaves, feed it wood chips, feed it compost. You do that and everything else falls into line. Most trees and shrubs can easily defend themselves from pests. They just have to be in good enough health to do so. If they're fighting to survive, they're not going to be able to defend themselves from pests. They cannot designate energy to that task. But if they're living in healthy soil and they're getting everything they need, they can designate appropriate amounts of energy to.
So she hasn't had any more issues of
as well as all
garbled speech?
I'm going to hit this last one and then we'll answer that question if that's what that is. My second to last point is that pests are insects too. They just need to eat sometimes. I would encourage you to let them eat wherever you can. Our rule of thumb is if the damage is less than 20% of the plants, let it be. The plant can withstand that kind of damage. More than 20%, now maybe we've got an issue, but we call this threshold. It's just a fancy term. Wow, sorry. And it just, let the bugs eat if you can.
Now, I get a catalog where you can order bugs.
Over again.
I said, I get a catalog at home where you can order bugs to eat bad bugs.
Yeah.
Do you think that works?
It does in some cases. They're called beneficial insects, and we do a lot of that ourselves. We've worked very hard over the last 3 to 4 years to get rid of all of our chemicals, and we're down to actually just one now. And we rely on a lot of different natural remedies, including using predatory insects. It's definitely a good strategy. The challenge becomes how to get those insects to take up residence. And to stay. Maybe they don't stay. Maybe you get some control and they leave and you just have to do it again next year. But sort of the holy grail is if you can create an ecosystem whereby you have enough habitat for those predatory insects to live naturally. So another vein of research that we're doing at Leaf and Limb is with something called Piedmont Prairies. And we've been building out for the last 3 years now, we're doing prairie restoration using only native flowers and native grasses. And the idea is to build essentially the ecosystem where these predatory insects live. And what we're finding is that there's a massive amount of life that lives in these Piedmont prairies. And what we're hoping is to be able to actually introduce that as part of our tree care program, whereby rather than using any kind of chemicals or even introduced predatory insects, we're actually doing prairie restoration around trees. And now every pest defense that is needed is living in that ecosystem.
It just works.
And you can do this yourself. Anybody can do this. It's gardening, but it's a different kind of gardening, and it's so much fun. Rather than having to you don't weed your garden when you're doing prairie restoration. Rather than managing individual plants in your garden, you're actually managing a community of plants, which is a very different gardening experience. One I like a lot better. And it's just really cool stuff. They're beautiful. They put in deep roots, 12 feet deep. They home to lots and lots of predatory insects. So that to me is the holy grail. Now we're not using anything because even the introduced insects can have some problems. Some of these are from Australia and some other places. So it's not perfect, but it's better than chemicals. Yes, absolutely. It's a great question. Other questions about insects? And by the way, y'all, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed this. In the last 30 years since I've been driving from Raleigh to the beach, I don't see insects on my windshield anymore. And I remember as a kid, we would get there. Now I'm sure aerodynamics have gotten better, so that's probably part of it. But I remember we had an old station wagon in the front. You had to do your windshield wipers just to be able to get to the beach. Anecdotal, but interesting. All right, final slide. When in doubt, look to nature. There's so much we can learn just simply by observing ecosystems. You know, when you're out hiking through the woods and you're walking through these amazing gardens here and the Triangle Land Conservancy's preserves and all these cool places around town, just pay attention to what's happening in our ecosystems. You can learn a lot about how things are supposed to work just by observation. So I'm going to do a plug here. Oh, this is a cool article of New York Times, definitely worth checking out. It was about a year or two old now, but I really enjoyed it. But I'm going to do a final plug here, and then we'll do a final round of Q&A for those who would like, and I'll stick around. I'm happy to stick around. But I don't want to imply that they're the only solution. Again, we need to be doing many things, but we at least know trees are tried and true for a very long time. We don't have to worry about the collateral damage that comes from other, there's not very many unintended consequences with planting trees. There's some, but it's not the same degree to which, say, switching from, as we've switched from gas to batteries, there have been a lot of interesting unintended consequences. Trees, we don't have to worry as much about that. We can help restore lots of soil and biodiversity and our aquifers and sequester carbon, do all kinds of amazing things just by caring for the trees we have and planting new ones. And if you want to learn more, we have tons of great articles on our website. We have a free ebook. We have the 12 tips that are available here today, and they're also available online. And then our newsletter. We like to teach folks things about trees. So I appreciate y'all being here. It's really fun to be in person. I'll stick around. I'll answer questions from y'all if you want, and then from anybody online who'd like to. Yeah. Thank you. All right, this is the wild and random ask any tree question you can think of.
So raise your hand here in the audience if you have a question for Basil.
Yeah, I have one.
Surprised there's leftover question. You've been asking so many so far.
I know. Okay, so this is kind of specific, but I have an Asian pear.
Okay.
And I noticed for the first time this year, it has, what is it, the cedar apple rust?
Yes, the little like COVID virus looking
it's like
thing.
it's like orange and crazy. I didn't treat it all this year, but is there something I should do for it?
Okay. If I'm talking to the average homeowner, the answer is no. You're not like the spores travel miles, and there are host plants everywhere. You're not going to stop it. Now, if you are the professional grower of pears, and that's your livelihood, and you're tending to the orchard, there are things you can do. But especially with pears, if you want to get rid of that problem, it's going to take a lot of really active management, and it's going to take probably some chemicals too. My recommendation is do the best you can to promote a healthy ecosystem and hope that you get some pears. The birds are going to get some, the squirrels are going to get some, fungi is going to get some, and hopefully you get some too.
I did get some this
year.
Okay, cool. So it was okay.
That's the easy version, and I like easy.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Any more questions here in the audience? Raise your hand. Oh, one moment. One moment. One moment.
I'm still a little perplexed about, you said if you had to plant one tree, it would be the white oak.
It wasn't totally fair, but I like it a lot.
Okay. Well, I have a gumball that I hate just because it drops so many gumballs and you step on them, they hurt you, fall. I mean, it's awful. Why would I not want to take out the gumball and plant the oak?
You may do anything you want.
Well, I know, but...
Well, I would just argue that gumballs are important too. Those trees also provide for all kinds of life. They too are a pioneer species like the pines. You'll typically see them first. They have high ecological value for other things. I would just make the argument that it has ecological value here, as does the oak. But, and then there's this other idea that a larger tree is doing more work, providing more ecological services. I really hate that term, but ecological services than a smaller tree. So it might take you 50 years to catch up to it. I'm not saying don't do it.
No, I always question myself. Yeah, I look at it and I go, well, but it's a pretty tree.
There's there's lots of room for doing what you want and improvising. I don't think you should ever feel like you can't do that. You can, certainly. But the gum does have ecological value as well.
So what you're saying is if I have a sick tree that comes down naturally in the storm, then put the white oak.
Sure. Absolutely. These are, you're in shades of gray generally in a good direction. So I wouldn't stress too much about these things.
And enjoy the fall color in the meantime for your sweet gum.
Coming full circle, did this help you with your earlier question asking about should you thin out a forest? The answer would be don't.
No, don't.
Yeah, don't. You guys said you wanted to thin it out to give trees more space,
Well,
but it actually,
I have this oak tree that too many of the branches are on one side. And I thought, well, maybe I need to be thinning out a little bit on this side so that the oak will put out branches that way.
It was a great question. I liked it a lot. I would just say leave it as is because it's actually better for them to be closer. And then on the edges of the forest, those trees growing the branches out, if you want to prune them, you can. But at the same time, nature is built off of change. When a branch falls, new ecosystems happen. Like when a tree dies, a whole nother life begins, It's almost like the tree goes on to live another life. It's just not alive. So.
I'm stressing out over things.
Questions online?
I'm just going to do a little bit of swapping out. Be one moment.
Sure.
And let me see what I can find for online now that I can do a few more things in Zoom. Okay, looks like no new questions online. Does anyone have any new questions online? Go ahead and ask them now.
I was just asking about white oak. Are there several? I thought there were several different species of white oaks. And so, does it matter which species?
Technically, there's only one white oak. It's Quercus alba, but you are right. I mean, they cross hybridize, especially here in North Carolina. There's a lot of cross hybridization. So you might look at a white oak that's actually a mix of white oak and post oak. There's a lot of hybridization, but Quercus alba is technically a white oak.
I think what she's thinking about is oaks is divided into two different groups, whether it's a group or a division or what it is between white oak and red oak.
Yeah.
And our native white oak is a white oak in that group.
Correct. Yeah.
So our native white oak is a white oak, but not all white oaks are white oaks, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Let me just tell you this. When it comes to classification, taxonomists can't even agree like where trees and shrubs begin and ends. And if we can't even agree on that, like you get into the common names, like where did hardwood and softwood come from? That's not a thing. White oaks and red oaks, the families, like there's so many common name classification issues there. But I'll just tell you this, any oak that's native to this area, and we've got like 50 or 60 of them, will be a great choice. I was having a little fun. You can't go wrong with any of the oaks that grow here. And quite frankly, most of our native trees are fantastic.
As Basil just said, the native white oak he was talking about is going to be the Quercus alba.
Yep.
So any other questions
Great
in
question.
the chat? Okay, I need to, looks like someone has something. And sorry, I have too many screens open on my computer. Okay, Sherry just said I put in a new question. Do you see it? Well, no. So, okay, let me scroll. Oh, jeez. See if I can pop my chat. Get it loose so I can see more questions. Sorry about this. I need to full screen it. Where did my cursor go? Sorry, everybody.
Oh, you're fine.
There we go. My chat window was just stuck. I can see one question at a time. Okay, let's see if I can stretch it.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, Sherry.
You're welcome.
Okay, here it is. In a yard that's about 1/3 acre with a septic tank in the front yard, how many trees can it support? We are the only ones in our area that have trees, old farmland. We have planted the trees that are currently on the property. By the way, our yard has levels of shrubs and plants as well.
Well, 1/3 of an acre is 43,000 square feet. So a third of that is about, ballpark 15,000 square feet, let's just say. And assuming there's nothing in it, Divide by 2, divided by 2. I'd say around 3,000 trees if you do a 2-foot grid spacing. And I know that sounds crazy, but I'm doing that in my yard as we speak. I've got about 1,000 trees going into what is about 1,200 square feet or something, a little more than that. But and if you go down that road, get the bare root saplings. But let's just assume that's not what you're looking to do. You could easily put in. Pick several oaks, several hickories, several beeches. That's your major overstory. And then find 2 to 3 understory trees you like. Maybe a native dogwood, Cornus Florida, maybe some possum haw. I don't know. Find some fun understory trees. And then maybe 2 or 3 species of shrubs and just layer it in there. And the nice thing is as these species grow together, if you can surpass say 8 different species is generally where it starts. Now these root systems start trading nutrients underground. You can kind of think of this like stock exchange system happening underground. The oaks trading the Rudbeckia for some magnesium, who's sending, it's this whole system underground. So we get these exponential benefits and the roots all weave together. So you're more likely that these trees are more likely to stand strong together. They can withstand storms better when there's more than one tree around because their root systems are better anchored amongst each other. So I would definitely encourage you to plant more than one.
I have a private question, and I'll go ahead and give the answer, at least in my case, for it. Someone has asked, is photosynthesis still taught in high school anymore? No one seems to ever mention this fundamental phenomenon, so that's so fundamental on Earth. And I can say that in my high school biology class, I was so looking forward to the plant chapters. Our teacher got to him and said, skip, I don't like plants. I'm going to go ahead and go to 4 more chapters into the future. She killed me in that class doing that. I was so looking forward to the plant chapters because, of course, I'm a plant guy, and she totally skipped them. So there's one high school for you. We didn't even cover what anything was that was a plant in that biology class, but certainly had that in college.
We didn't either in high school. I don't know. It's important. It's kind of like how it all works, really.
And I don't know what they do in 3rd grade. 3rd grade seems to be the plant science year here in Wake County. I don't know how far they go into photosynthesis. Probably less than what they should be in high school, and definitely less what they should be doing in college. But they at least probably know it. But don't hold back for the kids. They probably understand.
And put in the big picture, right? I mean, photosynthesis is how we're sucking carbon down and turning sun's energy into this fuel that runs the planet. I mean, we can go through every category, like the food we eat, plant-based. The animals we raise need plants. The houses we build, we're using plants to build these houses. Our art is built on fabrics from plants. Our medicines are 60% plant-derived. You even look at like, say, chemotherapy is built on, I want to say Taxanol or something, but it's a bark-derived drug.
Taxol's from Texas, native Northeast, or Northwest, excuse me.
Yeah.
Taxol, T-A-X-O-L. I don't know what the actual chemical is, but.
So essentially, our entire wealth as a species is derived from the things that we pull from the ground. That is where wealth comes from. So it's trees, it's soil, it's water. So yeah, photosynthesis, I'd put it up at the top of the list on understanding, but I don't think it's happening.
Here's kind of a unique one from Carolyn. Maybe you've done something like this. I think I know what I would do. I don't know if Carolyn has them or not, but she says, need to consider not shading your solar panels. Should she top her trees? Have you had any tree care around a house with solar panels on it or not?
We've had to do some, what we typically will recommend is doing proper pruning on the sides to clear out paths.
Yeah.
If you top the tree, it's probably going to doom that tree to a slow death.
Yeah.
Better to do very selective pruning in a way that the tree can continue to live versus topping. That's a tricky one. There are some yards where solar is not even possible without just clearing out trees. I don't have a good answer for that. You're going to have to make your own decisions based on your research.
That could be house to house to house to house.
Yeah, and listen, let's just say you've decided to get rid of some trees for your solar panel. Well, then, offset that. Contribute to Trees Durham or one of your local tree planting organizations. Give them some funding to get some new street trees in, and at least you're doing some carbon offset.
Oh, so we have more questions here.
We'll
in
start here.
person. Oh, I guess Jane has one.
Well, I recently read a book, Finding the Mother Tree.
Oh, yeah.
And so you're
Susan Simard.
just going back maybe to really creating forests in your yard
Yeah.
versus this one unhappy tree that you've decided that, you know, you like here.
Yeah.
You're making their environment for what they were really meant to grow like.
Yeah. And what's your question? Sorry.
And I'm just
Oh, yeah.
kind of relating that
Yeah, yeah.
to what.
That book was amazing. It's Suzanne Simard. It's such a good book. And she's done so much incredible research. And her story is unbelievably cool. Yeah, I love her work. And you're right on. I mean, there's a whole, yeah.
I have a question about root pruning. I live on a private road, and a couple of the neighbors further down, the blacktop is starting to lift because of some roots. And they were thinking about having the roots actually pruned so that it would protect the blacktop.
Yeah.
Will that kill a typical tree?
Depends. Depends on how close we are to the tree, how many roots are being pruned. You know, let's say the trees are sort of far away and it's maybe just a couple of stragglers. Shouldn't be a big deal. They still should be pruned carefully with a handsaw, that kind of thing. And there are root pruning saws versus like a bulldozer coming in and ripping it out. That's going to cause a lot more damage. But if those same trees are close by and roots are pruned, the tree could be destabilized or it could actually just be killed. So it really does kind of depend.
Is that something an arborist could actually come out and look at the tree and look at those and give an educated guess as to how much damage could be done?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you email me a picture, I can at least probably give you a pretty good guess from the photo. And I just need a photo of the street in question and just the nearby trees. And you can email it to me. I think my email's here. It's not. It's basil.camu@leaflim.com.
Well, I'm trying to keep them from doing the root pruning.
Yeah.
They think they should do the root pruning.
It's not always a bad thing. It can be an okay thing.
Okay.
Like I said, if it's some straggler roots and the trees aren't close, it's not going to cause any serious harm. But the question I thought you were going to ask is, do they damage foundations and do they get in pipes? And I'll just, this is worth knowing. Morton Arboretum did some great research on this, and they found that 80% of the time when there's foundational damage with roots involved or pipe damage with roots involved, it's actually not the tree's fault. We're just seeing the tree having taken advantage of the situation. Pipes typically rupture due to these micro vibrations in the earth or not being installed correctly, and then the pipe breaks. There's water in there. The root wants the water. It goes in, it grows. The plumber comes a couple of years later, looks down there and is like, oh, there's a tree root. So it was the tree root's fault. Well, correlation is not causation in this situation, and that's normally the case for roots and foundations. They rarely actually cause damage to either. Not so much for sidewalks and roads. It's a thinner surface. They can cause more damage, but it's worth knowing. And there's great solutions. Like, let's say you send me the photo, I'm like, oh, you can't do that. There's all kinds of other specifications that contractors can use to repave a road or sidewalks without damaging the roots.
Okay, we have a couple more online questions, and I think we'll probably have to call that a night for the questions.
Sure.
Sherry says that she has some trees that have just popped up in her yard, obviously from seed because of birds and animals. Are they just as good at adding to our tree numbers? And so far they've left them.
Absolutely. Yeah, saplings are the best. I mean, when you buy potted plants from the nursery or bare B&B plants and the roots are severed, it takes a long time for those trees to recover and actually grow. And then with potted plants, you'll find the roots are circling around. Saplings are great. They're little, they have great root structure, they require zero maintenance, and the research shows that after, say, about 5 years or less, that sapling is going to overtake the container plant or the B&B plant in size. So I'm a big fan of saplings.
Okay, and the last question is going to be from Sally. She's, of course, our Oregon person again.
Nice.
And on a tree that clones itself, in other words, new ones pop up from the root system, is it okay to remove the new sapling from the main tree? And she says, i.e. Sitka spruce. I didn't even know they did that. She's concerned about the roots from the mother tree.
I can't answer that question. Don't know much about that spruce.
Yeah. Well, my limited experience is with certain trees in our area, like crepe myrtle. You start digging them up and you just damage more roots and they're going to all start to grow. So I don't
yeah,
think
that's true. A lot of times the root disturbance actually is what activates the suckering action.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer. I would consult with somebody who's local in that species.
Yeah, definitely we're kind of out of that realm there, Sally, for the Sitka spruces. And I think we'll just end with just a comment that we have from one of our individuals here in the program. She says, great program. So thank you very much, Basil. We appreciate it. And she says, thank you for offering the remote option.
Cool.
We had a nice sizable group over here. And we're going to go ahead and conclude the program. So thank you very much, Basil, for joining us tonight. Thank you, everyone in the Zoom land for joining us as well. In addition to the people here in our audience,